Kevin Warsh is screwed. He just got handed the most powerful job in finance at one of the worst times in history to get the job. And as if that's not bad enough, a lot of Warsh's colleagues they don't like the guy. But the guy they do like, Jerome Powell, he's staying on at the Fed. And some would say he's sabotaging Kevin Warsh. He's running the Fed from the shadows, allegedly. Now, look, normally when a Fed chairman's term ends, he leaves. But Powell said he's not leaving. And this has only happened one other time in history, in 1948. And we need to talk about that because it's very important. And since then, not one chairman has had the gall to stay on at the Fed after his chairman term ends, until Powell. But it gets worse for Warsh. Powell's final meeting just delivered 4 dissenting votes from the committee that Warsh is supposed to lead, that he is leading now. The most since October of 1992. 3 of them are saying Warsh can't cut rates, and one of them is saying that he needs to start cutting. And yesterday afternoon, while nobody was paying attention, the 30-year Treasury auction cleared at 5%, that's insane, by the way. First time since 2007. I'll explain later why this is important, because you need to understand the impact of this, because it's going to impact the markets, but more importantly, it's going to impact you personally. But looking at the current situation, Powell isn't leaving. The committee, the people that Warsh is going to lead, are showing signs of mutiny, and the bond market has already overruled Kevin Warsh before he's even sat down for the job. Kevin Warsh is so screwed, and we need to talk about how it's going to impact the markets, how it's going to impact you. In case you don't know me, my name's Nick. I've been a professional investor and unprofessional trader for 25 years. I love finance, economics, and the markets. And what's happening right now with the Fed is something I've never seen before because I wasn't born in 1948 or before 1948. So let's crack into it. So to understand what's just happened to Kevin Warsh, we have to go back to 1948. I know that's a long time ago, but it's the only other time in history that this has happened because, like I said, normally when a Fed chair's term ends, he retires from the Fed. That's tradition. But Powell is staying on, and this has only happened once before. January 31st, 1948. A man named Marriner Eccles, what a name, by the way, he walks out of his office in Washington, D.C. For 14 years, he'd been the chairman of the Federal Reserve, the longest serving Fed chairman in history at that point. He'd been appointed by FDR in the depths of the Great Depression. He had run the Fed through the Second World War, and then Harry Truman became president, and Truman just didn't like Eccles. Because Eccles wouldn't do what he was told. Does that sound familiar, by the way? History doesn't repeat, but you know what I mean. So Truman wanted the Fed to keep interest rates artificially low. Cheap money, easy debt, the post-war boom floating on for as long as he could politically milk it. Eccles said, nah, I'm not doing that. He said, if you keep rates artificially low while the economy is running hot, you get inflation. I like Eccles, by the way. He sounds like a smart guy, right? He says, you destroy the dollar, and we're not doing that. So Truman just fired him. Well, technically. I mean, he didn't reappoint him as chairman, but that's roughly the same thing as firing him. So what did Eccles do? He pulled a Powell, or Powell pulled an Eccles, you know what I mean. So he said, I'm not leaving. He stayed on as governor. For 3 years, he just sat there quiet, polite, waiting. And then on March 4th, 1951, Truman made a big mistake. He told a press conference that the entire FOMC had personally agreed to support his Treasury rate cap, and that was a lie. And Eccles knew it was a lie because he was in the room when they talked about it. So Eccles did something brash. He walked over to a journalist and he handed him the FOMC meeting minutes, the actual minutes, the record of everything that was said in the meeting. And it showed that Truman had told the room what he wanted, and the room said, no, we're not doing that. These days, the minutes get published publicly, by the way, but they were secret back then. So the story runs the next day. The President of the United States caught lying about the Federal Reserve by the Federal Reserve. And within 3 weeks, the Treasury and the Fed signed what historians now call the 1951 Accord, the document that established the modern version of the Federal Reserve, the newly independent version of the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve that Powell is now running from the shadows, allegedly, which is why Warsh is screwed. He has the former chairman, who is well liked, by the way, who has the sympathy of his fellow governors in the Fed because of Trump's legal attacks. For those who don't know, by the way, Trump set the Department of Justice on Powell because Powell refused to cut rates. So having a potentially hostile, well-liked former chairman in Powell staying on the board is a big problem for Warsh. But that's not his only problem. That's just the first one. It gets so much worse. So let me set the scene here. The whole reason Kevin Warsh was picked by Trump was because he agreed that he would cut interest rates. Trump wants rates low, much like Truman, who already had rates low, but he wanted to keep them lower. Trump wants them low. He wants them down. So Kevin Warsh said, I'll cut rates, Trump. And Trump said, you're hired. I almost said you're fired. You're hired. So Kevin Warsh's goal, his whole reason for existing as a Fed chairman, is to cut rates. But at Powell's last FOMC meeting, there were dissenters, 4 of them. Now, you have to understand how rare this is, by the way. You almost never get even one dissenting vote at a Fed meeting. Most meetings are unanimous. They just follow whatever the Fed chairman says. But Powell's last meeting matched the most dissenting votes the Fed has had for the last 33 years, 4 of them. So let me explain how the Fed works. The Fed has 12 voting members. Normally, all 12 toe the party line. They do whatever the chairman says. But last month, 3 of them voted against the same thing, and 1 voted the other way. So they voted against the committee's statement that there was a bias towards lowering borrowing costs. Now, I'll translate that for you. They basically said that they're not cutting rates. Hammock said, I see this clear easing bias as no longer appropriate given the outlook. Translation, we're not cutting. But that's only 3 of the dissenters. The 4th was Stephen Mirren, a Fed governor and Trump's own appointee. He dissented in the opposite direction. He wanted a 1/4 point cut right there and then. So Kevin Warsh is about to take the job with a goal to cut rates. 3 of his board members are saying, we're not cutting. So, and also Powell, by the way, Powell likely doesn't want to cut. So that makes 4. 3 plus 1 is 4. There's a good chance some other voting members are just going to vote on the side of Powell because they like Powell better. But what makes this even more complicated for Warsh is that Stephen Mirren, the only support for cutting that Warsh had, he has to leave. He actually just resigned yesterday because for Powell to stay, someone has to go. And that guy is Mirren. So Warsh is losing the only ally he had and gaining a sworn enemy in Powell. So the 3 who said they weren't cutting, plus Powell, makes 4, like I said. If 3 more refuse to cut, that makes 7, a majority. And then for the first time in the history of the Federal Reserve, a chairman might get outvoted. Welcome to the job, Kevin. I hope you like it. And if that sounds bad to you, it actually gets worse. Warsh's first meeting as chair is on June 16th, 6 weeks from now. Even if Warsh found some way to convince his own committee, even if he held the cracks together long enough to vote for a cut, the bond market just told him to forget about it. Yesterday afternoon, the US Treasury auctioned $25 billion worth of 30-year bonds. A routine action. This happens all the time. The kind of thing that you read at the back of the financial section of the newspaper. What am I talking about? You know what I mean, though. Anyway, this one didn't. The yield cleared 5.046% for the first time since 2007. This is for the 30-year Treasury auction. And I know that sounds boring, but it's not. It's exciting. Well, it's exciting for me because I'm a bit of a finance nerd, but it's really important that you understand why this matters. When you auction a 30-year bond at 5%, you're not setting an interest rate. You're kind of revealing one. You're asking the largest, most boring, most patient pool of capital on earth, the pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, foreign central banks, what they think the US economy looks like for the next 30 years. And what are they saying? They're saying, given everything we suspect about the next 30 years of US inflation growth and fiscal policy, we need about 5% a year to hold this debt for that long. They see enough inflation and fiscal risk that they are demanding 5% compensation, which they haven't done since 2007. Now, this is where it gets really confusing, but you have to understand this. You need to understand this to get a picture of the US economy. The Fed's main job is to set short-term interest rates. Right now, that policy rate is 3.75%. When inflation is too high, the Fed usually has to raise rates. Higher rates make borrowing more expensive, which slows down new loans and credit growth. Less new borrowing means less new money chasing the same amount of stuff. So spending cools down, demand falls back a bit, and that takes some of the heat out of prices. It lowers inflation. But that's the short-term rate. The long-term rate, the one that matters for mortgages and 30-year loans, that's set by the bond market, not by the Fed. And that market has just pushed the 30-year yield up to 5%. So even though the Fed hasn't moved its rate, the bond market has raised the cost of long-term money borrowing. In effect, investors have started doing the Fed's job for them. They've started tightening for them. And remember, Warsh wants to cut rates. He doesn't want to tighten. He doesn't want to raise rates. Trump wants to cut rates. Investors just said, screw both of you, we're raising rates. And this actually puts a lot of pressure on the Fed to raise rates. When you raise rates on the 30-year, it puts pressure on the Fed to raise short-term rates. And as if there wasn't enough pressure anyway on the Fed. I mean, look, inflation is going off the charts. It's going out of control again. CPI was 3.8%. PPI was 1.4%. And traders are now betting on a Fed hike, by the way. By April 2027, the odds just jumped from about 50% to 72% that we're going to get at least one hike. So when Warsh sits down on June 16th, he's already trapped. He can't cut because his own committee won't back him. He has the former chairman who is better liked than him and more respected than him undermining him. He has, allegedly, he has bond investors pressuring him to raise rates. Inflation is rising, but if he hikes rates, if he raises rates, pretty much the only logical thing that anyone would do in this situation, the president fires him. Well, actually, he won't fire him. He can't fire him, but he won't be happy. And when Powell didn't cut, Trump manufactured a criminal investigation against him, set the DOJ on him. What's he going to do to Kevin Warsh? The thing is, Warsh has wanted this job his entire life, so I guess be careful what you wish for. Now, look, to be fair to Powell, he says that none of this is on purpose. He's not doing any of this on purpose. He's going to keep a low profile, kind of like Eccles did. At his last press conference, he was directly asked whether staying on as governor would make him a shadow chair, and he said, no, I'm not going to be a shadow chair. I want to keep a low profile. And he said he wouldn't interfere with Warsh's leadership. It's a very polite, very institutional response. Of course, that's what you would say. You just stay quiet, polite, and you stay in the room. And when you have a card to play, you play it. Look, I'm not saying that Powell is planning anything specific. I'm just saying he might be being nefarious here, he might not be. We have to see how it all unfolds. Maybe Powell is doing this because he honestly believes that rates should be raised, which honestly I believe too. And Powell doesn't have to do anything anyway. He just has to be there. Because there's another thing about Warsh that no one is really talking about right now. Warsh was confirmed at 54 to 45. So there was a vote to confirm him, 54 to 45. That is the most divisive Fed chair confirmation in the history of the United States. Trump's pick has the weakest mandate of any chairman ever. So not many people like Kevin Warsh, but people just don't like the guy, and everyone loves Powell. I said on my Substack article the other day that I almost feel sorry for Warsh, then I remembered he's a career banker, so I don't really care. If anything, I'm kind of just enjoying the drama at this point. But guys, this leads to a much bigger problem. And it's a problem that we need to discuss. Dysfunction. This is happening all over Western governments. Chaos and dysfunction. The UK, they're about to have their next prime minister resign, Keir Starmer, right? That makes 6 prime ministers in 6 years for the UK. Completely dysfunctional. The US has a shadow war happening within the Federal Reserve now. And don't get me started on the shit show that is Europe. While China is pulling ahead of us and beating us at almost every metric that matters. It's just kind of sad. But my question is, who suffers the hardest from all of these dysfunctional power games that the elites are playing? It's us, the people. Inflation is soaring again. I said CPI came in at 3.8%. Fuel prices are up. Food prices are up. Everything prices are up. We foot the bill as always. So anyway, guys, look, maybe I'm just becoming a grumpy old man, but I started this video saying that Kevin Warsh is screwed, but really it's us who are screwed. So what can you do about it? Well, inflation leads to debasement. Debasement is eroding your purchasing power. All the games these people play with our lives erode our purchasing power, making it more expensive for us to just get on with our lives day to day. So look at the assets that protect your purchasing power. Be that gold, silver, copper, T-bills, tips, even some stocks. Look, I'm not here to make your investment decisions for you. You decide what makes sense to you. I'm just saying that there's nobody looking out for you but you. I'll see you in the next one.